Caleb Rowan had lived in the Ridgepine Estates community for 5 quiet years before the HOA began acting like a private police force. At first, the complaints were petty letters about his trash can being visible for 11 minutes after pickup day or reminders that his mailbox needed to be 1.5 shades darker. He laughed them off. His wife, Mara Rowan, was the sheriff of Birch County, calm, disciplined, and respected. The HOA didn't know it, but their biggest mistake was assuming she was someone they could intimidate. Trouble began one Wednesday afternoon when Caleb arrived home early. He had barely pulled into the driveway when he saw 3 HOA board members standing in a semicircle around Mara, blocking her in as she tried to unload groceries. They had clipboards and smug expressions, classic HOA posture. He stepped out of the car as Marcus Heller, the board president, raised his voice at Mara. "Ma'am, you can't be here. This property is under investigation for repeated violations. You are trespassing." Caleb froze. Trespassing? On their property? Mara kept her composure. "This is my home," she said calmly, placing a grocery bag down. "I'm not trespassing." One of the board members snapped a picture of her and whispered, "We'll be calling the police." Caleb felt anger rising slow, hot, and dangerous. He walked closer, asking, "What violations? What investigation?" They ignored him completely and instead began taking photographs of Mara's license plate, her boots, even the groceries. It was harassment dressed up as community enforcement. Caleb pulled out his phone and began recording, and that's when the board's tone changed. Marcus stepped toward Mara again, pointing at her badge on her belt. "Is that real?" he demanded, voice dripping with sarcasm. Mara didn't answer. Instead, she simply stood, tall hands resting calmly at her sides. They assumed she was faking it. They assumed wrong. When Marcus dialed the police, confident that officers would take her away for questioning, Caleb felt something shift inside him. The HOA had crossed a line they could never uncross. They thought they were calling backup, but in reality, they were calling her deputies. And the moment those patrol cars arrived, nothing in Ridgepine Estates would ever be the same again. The first patrol car pulled up just 4 minutes after Marcus placed the call lights flashing, but sirens off. Caleb recognized the car immediately. It was Deputy Ryland Shore, one of Mara's newest recruits, a deputy who practically worshipped the ground she walked on. When he stepped out and saw Mara surrounded by HOA members, his jaw dropped. "Sheriff Rowan?" he blurted, confusion turning quickly into anger. Marcus strutted toward him with his clipboard. "Officer, arrest this woman. She refused to identify herself and is trespassing on her property under HO, a violation review." The deputy looked at him like he'd spoken another language. "This is the sheriff," Ryland said slowly, enunciating every word so the HOA couldn't pretend they didn't understand. The HOA board froze. Their faces drained of color, but Marcus tried doubling down. "I don't care who she says she is," he snapped. "She's impersonating law enforcement." Ryland cut him off. "She trained me. She trained every officer in this district, including the lieutenant who's on the way right now." Another patrol car pulled up, then a third. Officers stepped out, all recognizing Mara instantly. Some nodded respectfully. Some looked shocked. One muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." The HOA members stood stiff as statues, suddenly sweating under the weight of a dozen real law enforcement eyes. Mara finally spoke. "They claimed I was trespassing on my own property," she said, calm as stone. "And they threatened to have me arrested." One of the lieutenants turned to Marcus. "You called in a false report against the sheriff?" The tone was lethal. Marcus stammered. We didn't know." She didn't say she looked suspicious. The lieutenant stepped closer. Suspicious? For unloading groceries into her home? Caleb recorded every word. The deputy examined the HOA's paperwork and found no real violation. No pending investigation, not even a legitimate complaint. It was all fabricated. A personal vendetta, harassment, abuse of authority. And now, a false police report. Marcus attempted to back away, but the lieutenant followed him. "Sir, you just committed a crime," he said quietly. "And you did it while targeting the sheriff." Ryland took out his notepad. "Sheriff, would you like to file charges?" Mara took a breath. Caleb knew that breath. It was the breath she took right before everything changed. Mara didn't answer immediately, and that silence alone made every HOA member visibly tense. Caleb watched her eyes steady, assessing, calm. She wasn't just thinking about pressing charges. She was calculating the long-term implications, the pattern of harassment, and the board's abuse of authority. Finally, she spoke. "Before I make a decision, I want a full report from every officer who responded. I want your body cam footage preserved, and I want statements from all witnesses." The HOA members swallowed hard. This wasn't just a warning. This was the beginning of a formal investigation. Deputy Ryland nodded vigorously. "Already recording, Sheriff." Lieutenant Carson added, "We'll also be checking HOA protocols, complaint logs, and any records they claim justify this confrontation." Marcus tried to interrupt, but Carson raised a gloved hand. "Don't speak unless spoken to." "You've interfered enough." Mara stepped closer to Caleb. "This isn't the first time they've tried intimidation," she said quietly. "We need to document everything." The officers began spreading out, photographing the scene, interviewing neighbors who had gathered at their fences, whispering about the HOA's increasingly aggressive behavior. One neighbor, Miss Hargrove, came forward trembling with frustration. "They did the same to me," she told Carson. "They threatened my grandson because his basketball hoop was too visible. They fined me for having tulips that didn't match the approved color palette. They've been out of control." Another neighbor chimed in. "They targeted Caleb ever since he renovated his shed. They said the wood grain pattern violated community texture guidelines." "What does that even mean?" The officers wrote everything down. Meanwhile, Marcus huddled with the other board members, whispering frantically, as if they could rewrite reality by talking fast enough. Mara approached them. "You filed a false police report. You attempted to detain me on my own property. You harassed my husband and interfered with law enforcement duties." Marcus tried to smile. "Sheriff, maybe we got off on the wrong foot." "No," Mara cut in. "You crossed a legal line. And you didn't just do it to me." She turned slightly and gestured toward the growing crowd of neighbors. "You've terrorized this entire community under the guise of regulations. That ends today." Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. This wasn't just about them anymore. Mara was building a case big enough to dismantle the entire Ridgepine HOA structure. And from the look on Marcus's face, he finally understood that he had picked a fight with the one person who knew the law better than anyone else in the county and had the power to enforce it. The turning point happened when Lieutenant Carson asked for the HOA's violation documents. "If you claim this home is under investigation," he said to Marcus, "you must provide the written notice, timestamps, and board approval." Marcus hesitated. Then he pointed toward his car. They're in the trunk." But when he opened it, all that sat inside was a stack of blank violation sheets and a binder labeled, "Templates do not use without approval." Carson flipped through it and raised an eyebrow. "This is empty. There is no investigation." A murmur rippled through the neighbors. Some even gasped. Caleb filmed every second. Mara stepped forward. "So you lied to officers. You lied to my husband. And you lied to me. Marcus sputtered. We had verbal complaints. People were concerned. Who? Carson demanded. Marcus looked around desperately. The other board members avoided eye contact, suddenly unwilling to throw themselves into the flames with him. They backed away, one by one, until Marcus stood alone, sweating in the sun. Finally, one board member cracked. We never approved any investigation, he admitted. Marcus pushed this himself. He said the sheriff was too intimidating for the neighborhood image. Gasps erupted again, this time louder. Mara stared at Marcus, her voice ablaze. You targeted me because you didn't like how I looked unloading groceries? You were armed, Marcus stammered. It made residents nervous. Lieutenant Carson snapped his notebook shut. She is law enforcement. She is required to carry. Caleb stepped closer, unable to hold back anymore. You didn't think she was dangerous, he said coldly. You thought she was powerless. That's why you felt safe harassing her. Marcus said nothing. His silence was admission enough. Carson turned to Mara. Sheriff, we can proceed with charges. False reporting, harassment, attempted impersonation of authority, and obstruction. Caleb expected Mara to say yes immediately, but instead she shook her head. Not yet. Marcus exhaled in relief too early. Mara continued, I want a full audit of the HOA, financial records, complaint logs, board election documents, and I want it done legally, formally, and thoroughly. Carson nodded. We can issue an official inquiry. The HOA members panicked. This wasn't a fine. This wasn't a warning. This was a legal dismantling of everything they had built their power on. And as the neighbors gathered closer, whispering in excitement and disbelief, Caleb realized something. Mara wasn't just defending their home. She was liberating the entire neighborhood from years of fear. The board had picked the wrong family. And now, the whole HOA was about to collapse from the inside. Asterisk by the next morning, news about the HOA confrontation had spread through Ridgepine like wildfire. Neighbors who had previously been too intimidated to speak up now began approaching Caleb and Mara in waves, sharing their own stories, many things the HOA had tried with them. One elderly couple revealed that they were fined $200 for having their porch light too warm in color. Temperature. Another neighbor said the board threatened to sue him when his daughter chalked a hopscotch pattern on the sidewalk. They told me it violated the visual uniformity standard, he said bitterly. It was washable chalk. Mara listened carefully to every story, jotting down notes, dates, and names. This isn't just overreach, she said quietly to Caleb afterward. This is systemic abuse. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Carson contacted her with updates. Sheriff, you're going to want to see this, he said through the phone. We pulled transaction records from the HOA account. There are withdrawals that don't match any approved expenses. Mara's jaw tightened. How much? Thousands, Carson replied. Some labeled as Community Development Review, but there are no corresponding invoices. Caleb shook his head in disbelief. They were pocketing money. Mara nodded. Which means we're dealing with not just harassment, but possible fraud. Later that afternoon, officers returned to Ridgepine to collect formal statements. The board members stumbled over their words, some refusing to speak at all. Marcus attempted to defend himself, claiming everything was a misunderstanding, but the officers were unmoved. We have documented evidence contradicting your claims, Carson told him. And we have at least 14 witnesses who allege misconduct. As this unfolded, more neighbors gathered in small clusters, watching with a mixture of relief and astonishment. For years, they had lived under the HOA's rigid, punishing grip. They'd watched board members roam the neighborhood with clipboards like patrolling guards, issuing fines for the faintest infraction. But now, for the first time, people felt safe enough to speak. One neighbor, Joel Whitman, approached Mara with something unexpected. "Sheriff, I have something you need to see." He handed her a thumb drive. "Security footage from my house. It shows Marcus and the treasurer coming onto my porch at night opening my mailbox." Mara's eyes narrowed. "That's a federal offense." Joel nodded. "I didn't report it because I was afraid. But after what they did to you, I'm done being afraid." And in that moment, Mara realized something powerful. This wasn't about her anymore. This was an entire neighborhood rising up, and she was their shield. That evening, Mara spread evidence across the dining table: statements, photos, timestamps, financial printouts, and the USB drive. Caleb brought her coffee, watching her organize everything with the sharp focus she was known for. "You're building a case like they're a criminal organization," he said. Mara didn't look up. "What they've done is criminal," she replied. "Abuse of authority, financial misconduct, mail tampering, false reporting. And that's just the beginning." She plugged in the USB drive. The footage played. Marcus and the treasurer lurking around Joel's porch at nearly midnight, whispering to each other. The treasurer opened Joel's mailbox, pulled out an envelope, photographed it, and slid it back inside. "They were checking what notices he received," Mara said. "Trying to build evidence to fine him." Caleb clenched his fists. "How did we never see this?" Mara paused the video. "Fear," she answered. "They relied on people being scared, isolated, and afraid of retaliation." Then she clicked to the next clip. It showed Marcus walking up to the house of a single mother, snapping pictures of her backyard toys, shaking his head in disgust. He fined her $300 for visual clutter. Caleb's anger grew. "We have to expose them." Mara nodded. "We will, but it has to be airtight. No loopholes. No excuses." Later that night, there was a knock at the door. Mara opened it to find Deputy Ryland standing there with a sealed envelope. "Sheriff," he said, handing it to her. "Preliminary audit results." Mara opened it, scanning the document quickly. Her expression darkened. "They diverted community funds to pay for landscaping work at Marcus's private home," she said. Caleb blinked. "You're kidding." "And they billed the neighborhood for it under general aesthetic improvement." Ryland crossed his arms. "There's more. They also wrote a $1,200 check to a company that doesn't exist. Address leads to an empty lot." Caleb shook his head in disbelief. "So they've been stealing from the community for years." Mara exhaled slowly, her decision made. "Tomorrow, we file formal charges." She glanced at the mountain of evidence. "But before that, we call a community meeting." Caleb smiled faintly. "You're going to tell everyone?" "No," Mara replied, her voice steely. "I'm going to give this neighborhood the power back. And I'm going to make sure this HOA never harms another family again." And somewhere across the neighborhood, Marcus had no idea how close his empire was to collapsing by the hand of the very sheriff he tried to intimidate. When my wife, Sheriff Dana Hall, stepped out of the patrol SUV, the entire HOA board froze like they'd been flash frozen in panic. Officer Ruiz looked conflicted, torn between embarrassment and relief. Meanwhile, the HOA president, Glenda Marsh, puffed out her chest like she still believed she had control over what came next. "Sheriff Hall," she began, trying to sound authoritative, "your husband has been extremely hostile and non-compliant. We request immediate removal and charges." That was her fatal mistake, addressing the sheriff like some rookie deputy she could bully. Dana lifted her sunglasses with the slow, dangerous calm of someone who'd trained half the officers in the county, and definitely the one standing here now. "Glenda," she said, voice sharp enough to slice metal, "I trained these officers. I see their reports, and I know exactly when someone is lying to them. Glenda opened her mouth, but Donna raised a hand. Before another word leaves your mouth, understand this. Filing false reports is a crime. Impersonating an officer to gain compliance is a crime. Harassment is a crime. Trespassing to stage evidence is a crime. The officers shifted awkwardly, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into a turf war built on nonsense. Meanwhile, neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, recording the scene like it was peak Saturday entertainment. Glenda shrank, her power wilting like a balloon losing air. We were enforcing community standards, she whispered. Dana stepped closer. Show me the bylaw you claim my husband violated. Glenda stuttered. A board member shuffled through a binder filled with messy printouts and handwritten notes. Nothing matched. Nothing made sense. Nothing held up. Officer Ruiz coughed. Ma'am, there's nothing here that authorizes an arrest. Donna looked at her deputies. Stand down, all of you, and take statements from everyone she's harassed. That's when Glenda realized the nightmare she started was now marching straight toward her wearing. A sheriff's badge dot with Glenda cornered. Donna turned to the growing crowd of neighbors who had stepped outside once the word spread. The sheriff is here. And it's about the HOA again. Phones were recording from every direction, capturing a moment the neighborhood had secretly wished for, someone finally confronting Glenda's unchecked rule. If anyone here has experienced harassment, intimidation, or misuse of authority by this board, Dana announced, you have the right to file a formal complaint right now. It was like opening a floodgate. Mrs. Bennett stepped forward first, shaking with nerves. She threatened to fine me because my welcome mat was too cheerful, she said. A young father followed, explaining how Glenda tried to block his. Child's birthday bounce house because it wasn't. Aesthetic, a retired veteran, added that Glenda had walked into his backyard uninvited, claiming she was inspecting for rule violations. Each complaint was more ridiculous and more disturbing than the last. The officers took notes as fast as their pens allowed. Glenda sputtered, You can't do this. This isn't a legal proceeding. This is an HOA matter. Dana faced her directly. No, Glenda. This is a criminal matter now. You involved law enforcement. You lied to officers. You abused your authority over homeowners. Glenda tried to retreat, but Dana stepped forward. And you tried to have my wife arrested, I said, stepping beside Dana. Correction. Donna smirked. My husband arrested. The crowd chuckled nervously. Glenda trembled, her earlier confidence fully drained. One of the board members, a tired-looking man who appeared moments away from quitting life itself, quietly handed his clipboard to Dana. I'm done, he whispered. We didn't sign up for this. More board members followed, removing lanyards, badges, or whatever little symbol of power they had. It was a mutiny in real time. And Glenda? She was now alone holding a crumbling binder and a collapsing sense of superiority. This isn't over. She snapped, but her voice cracked. Dana crossed her arms. Actually, it is. And in that moment, everyone watching believed her. Asterisk as the officers finished taking statements from almost a dozen neighbors. Glenda stood isolated in the center of the cul-de-sac, gripping her binder like it was a life raft in a storm she created. Dana gave the officers a nod, and they approached Glenda with professional calm. Ma'am, Officer Ruiz said, we need to inform you that you are under investigation for filing false reports, harassment, and obstruction. The color drained from Glenda's face. You're investigating me? She whispered, as though the idea violated the natural order of the universe. Yes, Dana replied firmly. You weaponized law enforcement against innocent homeowners, including your own sheriff's spouse. Neighbors murmured in agreement, some nodding, others filming. Glenda's eyes darted around, searching for support, but the board members who once backed her had already dispersed, shedding their authority like loose feathers in the wind. One of them, an older woman with a shaky voice, finally spoke. "Glenda, you went too far." That sentence seemed to strike harder than any legal threat. She looked at the officers again. I didn't mean," but Dana cut her off gently yet firmly. "Intent doesn't erase impact. Your leadership created fear, not community." Dana turned to me. "Take out your phone." I did. "Record this," she said loudly enough for the neighbors. Transparency matters. For the first time, Glenda flinched at being on camera. The officers issued her a citation and notified her she would be formally interviewed at the station later that week. She signed the paperwork with trembling hands. When the officers stepped back, Dana walked closer. "Glenda, step down from this board voluntarily. Today. Right now." Glenda's jaw tightened. "You can't force." Dana's voice dropped to a tone only law enforcers use when they've already won. "If you don't, the county will remove you. And trust me, their process will be far less kind." Silence fell. The neighbors watched. Glenda looked at each faces she had lectured, bullied, and controlled. And one by one, they looked back without sympathy. Glenda's shoulders slumped. "Fine," she whispered. "I resign." And just like that, the HOA's iron grip shattered. The moment Glenda resigned, a wave of relief spread through the neighborhood, like fresh air entering a room that had been closed for years. Some neighbors clapped softly. Others let out long exhaled breaths. A few even hugged. The officers finished their paperwork and quietly departed, leaving the street buzzing with a mixture of victory and disbelief. Dana turned to me with a tired smile. "Well," she said, "that escalated quickly." I wrapped my arm around her. "You handled it perfectly." She shrugged modestly. "Just doing my job." But everyone knew it was more than that. She hadn't just stopped an unjust arrest. She had dismantled a toxic power structure in under an hour. As neighbors gathered, a spontaneous meeting formed right there on the curb. For the first time, people actually felt safe speaking honestly about the HOA. They agreed to dissolve the current board entirely and replace it with volunteers who wanted fairness, not control. Dana offered to help oversee the transition to ensure no more abuse of authority would be tolerated. "We should have done this years ago," one neighbor admitted. Another added, "It took the sheriff stepping in for us to realize we weren't powerless." As the new unity built, Glenda, not used to being powerless, slowly walked toward her car. She paused before getting in, looking at me with a strange mix of anger and regret. "You ruined everything," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, Glenda. You ruined it the moment you tried to weaponize the police against my wife." She didn't answer. She simply drove away, her reign over the neighborhood dissolving into the rearview mirror. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Rules became reasonable. Fines disappeared. People smiled at each other again. And for the first time since we moved in, the community actually felt like a community. Dana even became an unofficial advisor to the new board, though she joked she'd only step in if someone tried anything even remotely Glenda-like. As for me, I installed cameras, lights, new locks, and a massive welcome sign. This home is protected by the sheriff, and she lives here. Nobody ever messed with us again. And the HOA? It didn't just change. It became something worth being proud of.